we'll take a breath no matter whether or not I invite you, but it's to bring awareness to the fact that you're actually bringing attention to the experience in the body of the breath. On the inhale, just letting our attention rest lightly on the inhale, and on the exhale, again, resting lightly on the exhale. And at the end of the exhale, resting in the gap. And the next inhale naturally arrives. And just as Andreas so wonderfully shared with us, our posture conditions what's happening in the mind. Being grounded, and for a moment allowing your attention to rest with the sensation of your feet on the floor or your sits bones on the cushion or chair. Being an ally of gravity. Sensing how that experience of connectedness can actually cultivate this quality of stability, presence, and safety. And then the spine. Being with this sense of uprightness. That capacity with surprise.
Surprise.
It's a setup. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I think Al Gore lost the election because he was experienced as a kind of stiff. And our capacity to be nimble, be flexible, to adapt to what is happening in the present moment. Essential for our survival as we meet each other in the narrow hallway of any given moment. And then for a pulse, just remember really why you're here. Yeah, I took a plane car, walked. But what Suzuki Roshi called this innermost request. Richie touched into it in terms of meaning, purpose. Not so much transactionality, instrumentality, but much more a sense of being deeply aligned with our values. You know, what it is to care. To connect. To resonate with. To align. To not be apart from, but more than even coming alongside. And to experience co-sentience. Thank you, and we will turn our attention now to some of the beauty of Amy's inquiry that has been gestating through these sessions. And may we, as Laura so wonderfully brought us into, and Melissa, the sense of how to listen deeper than our personality, how to allow ourselves to really rest in this quality of fundamental openness with each other. And also for us to have the courage to ask each other and to enter into good questions, even with the vigor of the battle of the giants that we experienced between John and Adam. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how much beauty in gestation you'll all hear tonight, given that it's now 11:20 and I'm here in Paris, France. So, but maybe I could start by saying that my open listening is trying to be very open, but there have been so many different approaches and so many different personalities and intellectual spaces that as I've been listening to everyone since yesterday, I kind of feel, even having seen some of the abstracts beforehand, when I'm listening, I feel a little bit, it's a terrible metaphor, but like there's a pinball machine that's kind of going bonkers, like Andreas's machine in my head. And so somebody says something and it bounces off another thing in my head and goes cha-ching, cha-ching, and then somebody else comes up and there's just this sense of kind of almost chaotic activity going on, where paradoxically at the end, I think I've formulated something of a sense of what I just went through, but actually no. It needs to be cooked, it needs to be reiterated, it needs to be thought through. I need to look at the words carefully on the page. So during those 10 minutes, I was looking at my notes and wasn't good enough to put anything together that was really beautiful. I'm very sorry. But I did think that there was something really exciting about having this notebook here that I can look at, and the capacity to be able to listen to what everyone had said, to re-experience this the French is mise en acte, this play that we've done together, which is really a demonstration of the multiplicity of ways of knowing, which I think is almost a way of doing what we're about. And so it is all about different ways of knowing and different approaches, and being open to them, even if you can't necessarily understand everything and integrate everything all at once. So that was one of my thoughts about listening to the totality of this experience. And then I was thinking a little bit about what we've been doing, and I'm going to pass it to Gabor too here, because I know he has things to say, but what we've been doing at Mind and Life Europe, and I was looking at, so we have dedicated our year to the notion of care. And I was looking at one of our little concept notes that it's not a little note, in fact, it's a long note, but it's in draft form. But one of the questions we ask in it is, what if our way of knowing the world, which is itself a sense of power, is tantamount to a way of caring for the world? And I thought to myself that this was actually what we've been doing at this meeting, which is caring for one another. So rather than give you a lot of specific questions, and which I could do, I was just wondering if you would like to reflect a little bit for us at Mind and Life Europe, but for all of us, on this relationship of knowledge and caring, since Roshi Joan also mentioned the word care. We're clearly all perceived with, we're all, preoccupied with meaning. And we've all said it in different ways. Every single one of you has said it in different ways. And so that must be very related to the notion of caring. And so I was just thinking that perhaps this relationship of knowledge and power and care might be a good general way to set you into thinking more globally about what we've done today. So that was my question to you, a reflective question.
Thank you so much, Amy. Gabor, do you have any reflections to share?
Thank you so much. Just a question. What is our narrative? What is our narrative? Do you hear me?
Yes, what is our narrative, you're asking?
Yes. What is our narrative?
It's quite a question.
We were talking a lot about narratives and this narrative and that narrative, and I saw that, or felt that there was a narrative unfolding here, but it would be probably nice, at least for me, to explore or uncover the main features of our narrative.
It's a beautiful question. Maybe one way to to move here into that question, or with whatever else is coming up, since we're online, why don't we actually move to Laura to see what thoughts she might have about any of what has been said so far, the previous days, the questions raised by Amy and Gabor, or another question you'd like to pose.
Thank you, John. And yes, actually, maybe I can share this thought that came out from Andreas' talk. And also Melissa, I was saying, and maybe also a bit of what I managed to hear from Molly's talk, but then it was too late for me. Sorry. And yes, I was thinking about this. So maybe you noticed that, yes, that for me was very important also to stress the importance of word breaking, not just word making. And I really liked that Melissa really got my point, that this word breaking is really part of this circularity, this movement of recreation and transformation. And so related to what Andreas said, I was thinking, oh, wow, so where could we find reflection in this, in experiencing art and something like that? And yesterday I brought this quote from Francisco Varela about this breaking out of habits, and there we can find the reflection, like this critical moment of the experience. And I would like to suggest, and this is what I'm thinking, and maybe it's also a question, how to understand these breakouts in a circular manner, right? So not like, that you are breaking out the experience like it for the avant-garde, this ecstatic moment that really put you out of place. This is a problem if it put out of place. It will be a new manner of displacement. So if really we care to listen to the place, to the piece of art, to us, to the we more, it should not be this breaking out just as an ecstatic moment, right? But more like, and here comes Molly, a process of excavation, going deeper into the experience, right? So really being there. So I was thinking also, again, of what Andreas was saying about microphenomenology, right? So just being there and listening more, reflecting, open up this ordinary in a different manner. So I was trying to think this breaking out, not just going into the extraordinary, but right, like experiencing the ordinary in a non-reductionist manner. And if we do this responsibly, I'm work on ethics, so responsibility for me is quite important. If we do this responsibly, maybe we can find this circularity, this process of continuous creation that is made also of word breaking. So yes, this was my reflection. Sorry, I'm bringing other stuff into the plate, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. While we're online, Al, do you have any reflections to share here at the end? So rich.
Indeed. Just very briefly, and this was triggered by something that Andreas had offered in his talk, but makes contact with what several others were bringing up. So, I think as many who are participating in this symposium are aware, for us to enter into the shared subjectivity of collaborative sense making, there's a kind of empathy that has to occur, but it's not simply an empathy of reverberating with the experience, particularly the affective experience of another person, because that's simply emotional contagion, and that can very easily lead to empathic overarousal and distress, and doesn't come to serve that sort of collaboration. And so additional components are needed, among them perspective taking. And I've often talked about how perspective taking is embodied. But I think I've fallen into a habit of, when I say that, I'm referencing bodily experience. And when I say it's enacted, I'm again referencing bodily experience, but more internal bodily experience, forgetting that the taking of perspective is fundamentally enacted. So as Andreas had people moving around those art exhibits and putting themselves in these shared positions, I suspect one of the reasons that felt so compelling for those participants is that empathic connection that was enabled by being made aware. When I talk about taking someone else's perspective, I'm imagining that movement in space that reveals to me that, what I'm seeing looking at the screen here and the image of all of you in the Zendo is quite different than what you're seeing as you're looking at my image. So those were some of the reflections that were triggered by that last presentation for me.
Thanks so much, Al. And now I'll just ask our participants who are here, is anyone moved to say something? Rich?
I wanted to go back to Amy's comment about caring and knowledge, which I love. It's really, I think, so extraordinarily important. I can envision that as a topic for a future Varela Symposium. One of the really interesting things that I've reflected on recently is the epic choice that we are being confronted with now with the various polycrises that have been so powerfully reviewed here, is the choice between fear and love. And one of the things that we know that fear does is it literally contracts the aperture of awareness, and so it very directly constrains knowledge, and love is really, and caring is the antithesis of that. And so I think that there is something very deep and important about the relationship between caring and knowledge. And it also has huge implications for the academy, because I think most of us up here who are members of the academy would say, if we're honest with ourselves, that the environments in which we find ourselves in the academy are not particularly caring places. And yet the academy is the institution in our society that is elevated to be the knowledge generators. And we're starting off being deeply impaired, I think, in our capacity to do that because of the impoverished care that is embodied within these institutions. And so I think that there's a radical challenge that we have before us for how to incorporate care into the institutions of knowledge in our society. And I think it's also one of the reasons why all of us feel so so much heart connection to the Varela Symposium and to Upaya, because it is a place where we can pursue knowledge from the perspective of caring, which just is unfortunately so rare in our culture today. So I just wanted to thank you for naming that, and I think it's just deeply important.
John, if I could. Amy, you reminded me of a term used by Gregory Bateson. The term is metalogue. And that term reflects the experience of being the experience about which we are speaking. And I think that connects very much to what Richie is reflecting in his comments and what we've been touching into here. That we're, not in a Marriott, so to speak. The room is not gray. Not that I'm against black or something, but it's not a gray room. That tables and desks are not separating us. That there is technology in our midst, but the driver of the technology is a super nice person. So it's alive, and it's wet, and it's precarious too. And what Richie mentioned is really critical, and that is why I use the word safe, and why our practice is about cultivating the capacity for safety, not only within our own experience, but bringing greater safety into a world by having the means to actually meet disruption in a way with a quality of both not knowing and of a fundamental confidence. Now, I say this as someone who's sat with many dying people. And also I say it as a Zen practitioner, where people come into the Dokusan room so vulnerable, and it is the experience of deep listening where I don't tell them what they're experiencing or give advice, where the inquiry, the field of inquiry is opened. What was your experience as you were sitting just before you were called into interview with me? Being able to go back and then to understand, you will be asked that question again, probably in another encounter with the teacher, and having the engagement of attention and memory present, so that your capacity to attend becomes much more refined. What did you learn from the anger that came up for you, that you just shared with me, directly or indirectly, in your experience of sitting? What became visible for you in the body? What appeared for you in the body? As you began to fall asleep on the cushion. What was your experience, when you really lost the thread of your attention and went to Chicago instead of staying here, and you found yourself, eating pizza in Chicago instead of, attending to your breath? What allowed you to actually notice that you were lost in a proliferation? What was that experience? So that is, that Andreas brought that up, is, bringing to our own experience, not to objectify, but to have this reflective, but also one of the factors of enlightenment of the so-called seven is investigation. Our capacity to look really deeply, to investigate, to be curious, not just to poke, but to be curious. That sensibility, again, through, you were speaking about play, instead of bringing the sense of aggression actually bringing the sense of love and appreciation into this path of discovery that is our experience of life. So back to Metalog briefly. We have tried to be the thing about which we are speaking, for better or for worse. And I think that kind of congruence is very liberating.
Molly, Melissa, Adam?
I have a thought. And I really also appreciated Amy's question and Richie's reflections. I loved all of the talks and teachings that we received here, and they come at a time where humanness feels or has sometimes felt precarious. And there's a lot of discourse around replacing humans with machines. And I feel a lot more optimistic after this symposium, because I feel like the wisdom and the knowledge that we created here and reflected on here is just so deeply human. GPT cannot do the experiments that Andreas shared with us. And so I think that's what I'm going to reflect on, is like, I think that there's just something very, very deeply human about the heart-led knowledge and wisdom that is coming out of this coming together. And that gives me hope about the situation that we face.
Such a moving symposium. I'm really touched and learned so much from all of you. Thank you for being here and sharing so much wisdom. It seems we were navigating great uncertainty and looking at the space between and the space all around. And I want to introduce a wonderful concept you may have heard about. I shared in our pre-meeting. Albert Marshall, a Mi'kmaq elder from Nova Scotia, talks about two-eyed seeing. And he introduced this as a way to incorporate traditional Indigenous medicine with Western medicine up in Canada. And it's really been used now to look at how to bring together the best of the Western eye with precision and measurement and analysis, with the best of Indigenous sciences, with long-term thinking, intergenerational thinking, kinship, ethical spaces of engagement. So I offer that is just another way of thinking about two-eyed seeing, and it's really many ways of seeing. And there's even a word for it that I cannot pronounce, but it's a beautiful word that actually means all-around seeing, Laura. So I can't wait to share that with you. And I'm just so thrilled that even though we came from so many different disciplines and countries and places, we are co-creating a narrative of a land and a life of flourishing, well-being, kinship, relationality, correlation, synchrony, love, and generosity. These were all things that all of us shared. And yet we know to get there, it's precarious, and we have to practice, and that we need prayer, getting back to the roots of the word precarious. It's unstable, and we have to be experimental. And to be experimental, we need to play. We cannot feel constrained or that we will be punished. We must be free and safe, as Roshi Jones said. And there's a wonderful new book out called We Are in the Middle of Forever, Indigenous Voices on a Changing Planet. And I was fortunately interviewed for it. And we came up with this idea of playful kinning, that to create kinship, it's really a verb, and that we are always kinning with this precarious space between and moving forward and coming back. And it's really part of Indigenous ways of knowing with our trickster characters. They're always teasing us as we tease each other here. And there's a little edge. It's not just love and flowers, right? There's a little edge to keep learning with those learning edges. So it is precarious and helpful that we engage in that kind of playful kinning. Those are some thoughts I wanted to offer here. Miigwech, thank you.
Wonderful, beautiful. Adam.
So, is this on? Yeah. I just wanted to reflect on the reflections and say, how come everybody else's reflections were like, oh, you did so good, and I got John telling me you're wrong?
Yeah. But John, no edge, no edge.
No, I'm kidding, because it was actually what was amazing is afterwards we talked, we were having this conversation, and all the three of us about semantic and we learned something, or I learned something fundamental, right, about thinking about the relationship. So, out of, because it's not, right, we said it's not always like, oh, love, hug, it's, sometimes it's like poke, 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 and that as long as the poking has the playfulness underneath it. One of the greatest things about being a New Yorker is like when you meet another New Yorker, you know that they are, because you can insult them and they're going to insult you back. And that's the game. Like, and you never, nobody's insulted by it. It's like, oh, okay, here's the ball. Now throw the ball back.
Forget about it.
So, but what I wanted really to reflect on was Gabor's question about the narrative, because I felt that was so much an important thing that was coming out of this, because we do live in this time that seems so precarious, so dangerous. But what it, I think, is really happening is what we're in the middle of in these conversations we had, and we had a lovely conversation yesterday taking a walk afterwards, is that it's the emergence, and I don't want to just say new narrative, right? Because part of the task here is to recover and excavate narratives that were lost, that were needed, that sustained, cultures for thousands of years, and just in the last 400 or so have gotten, thrown overboard. So that, what was so powerful about this was the sense of like, oh yeah, we are together formulating, looking for ways, this way, up way, looking underneath, to find where those narratives are, where those narratives can get some purchase to help us through our precariousness. And then the idea that like, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. Like we don't know what we're, what we're doing will take, will have its effect. It may be a generation or two or so, and that's always the way it's been. And so, but we're my metaphor is the dropping the dye in the water, and the dye drops in, and then it diffuses, and over time the water changes color. So that lovely joke that Roshi told about when His Holiness was asked about the French Revolution. I just thought that was great. It's like, it's too early to tell. And so it's too early to tell what's going to come out of this. And we don't need to, like, we walk out of here tomorrow and we've changed the world, right? The world has its own ways, the world has its, and we're just part of it. So the idea of those new narratives, I felt like there were drops in the water of creating those new narratives.
Yeah, thanks for some really, really fascinating reflection. So I would also like to go back to Gabor and Amy. And Amy, I think the notion of care as a theme is a brilliant one. I'm really sad I wasn't involved in coming up with it, because I would have loved to take ownership for it, but I can't. But it's brilliant. And it seems to me that, in the vocabulary that we have here, that something that characterizes care is that it ultimately deals also with the agency of the other. And therefore, care has to be perspectival and has to be, in a sense, sensitive to the agency of the other. Because if that's not the case, it's not really care, it's about something quite different. And I think that notion of care, you can say, opens up for a perspectivism, which may be the type of narratives we need right now. So Gabor, you asked the question, what is our narrative? And I don't think we have like one narrative. I think there is something about kind of living with stories that has many perspectives built into them that are the narratives we need right now, right? That's not a master narrative, and it's not the end of narratives, it's something else. Some would say that, part of what happened when the novel came about was that that's precisely what the novel was able to do, that it could contain so many different voices at the same time without any of them necessarily being the dominant one. That's a difficult one for politics. It's a difficult one for ideology, but it's a really good one for life. And I think in that sense, the polyphony of of the novel or the polyphony of narratives, that's important. If you bring into it that care which is about respecting the agency of the other. So that would be a principle rather than a narrative.
Yeah, I very much, yes. I had very much the same sort of thought about narrative, and actually this and care, and there's an interesting double entendre, like there's a way in which the word care, it has more than one meaning. So when we say, the relationship between care and knowledge, you could say we want to know what we care about. And in other words, what's salient to us, what matters to us. And we can care about things that are not very nice. We can care about things that are about domination, about power, about control. We can care about things that are rooted in confusion. And so there is, I think, a very strong relationship between power and that kind of care and that kind of knowledge. And here I'm, of course, invoking Foucault, right? The relationship between knowledge and power is also a relationship between knowledge and care in the sense of what we care about. So part of that, of course, is how do we learn what we care about? We learn that from the stories we tell, actually. That's a big part of how we are, and not just the individual stories, but kind of the narrative universe in which those stories are unfolding, which can have many, many different stories in that new universe. What matters to us, what we care about, and I'm thinking now, especially of Lauder's notion of the importance of not just world making, but a sort of undoing of the world. And this brings to mind the notion, another kind of notion of care, which is connectivity. And in the Dzogchen tradition, so anytime we're telling a story, in the great perfection or Dzogchen tradition from Tibet, anytime we're telling a story, anytime we think we're talking about reality, we're always talking about something that's contingent, that's not absolutely real. And for our experience, this is always from the standpoint of experience or consciousness itself. And so for that tradition, the key here is to understand what is the nature of experience? What's the nature of consciousness? And it said that first, it's empty of any fixed identity, but it is luminous. So it's Ranjing Tongba or Ngowo Tongba. It's empty from any kind of essence, yet its nature is luminosity, which basically means a kind of knowingness. And then its expression, interestingly, is called Tukje Natsok, variegated compassion. But it literally means compassion, but it also means that all the negative stuff is about that kind of connectivity. So that it's not like we can just create, if we just sort of let things go naturally as they will be, suddenly all knowledge will be about caring in the sense of compassion. It's like we have to actually work to undo the stories, to make them empty, to undo the stories that are in a certain sense causing us to care about the wrong things. We have to see those stories as empty, and when we tell new stories, the claim in that tradition would be, if we try to turn that into the true story, we're going to go back to all of the same problems. So we have to learn, in a sense, to have multiple narratives that teach us to care in multiple different ways, highly flexible, responsive. So in that sense, maybe there isn't just one story. There are many stories. Maybe there's not just one universe of our story, but many universes. But definitely, in some sense, learning how to care in a different way, I think, is an inflection point for us now.
John, thank you. I think that is the perfect way to conclude our experiment together. I just so appreciate our community here for opening themselves to precarity, in the kind of interactions that we've shared with you, and also the quality of attention that you've offered us, which has allowed us to play more freely than in other kinds of settings where play is discouraged. So I'm in the spirit of great kindness to all, and particularly our European friends, knowing the hour is advancing, and also in the spirit of our love of our residents, I'm going to ask us, we're going to, I'm just going to say the 4 vows of the Bodhisattvas at the end. I'm going to conclude with that. And then that will be followed by you actually moving the chairs out of the space. That would be so kind to the residents. Moving the cushions, Noah will direct as he moves his stuff out of here. Zazen will happen probably at 5:30, but we don't know. But at 4:30, some of us will be going over to the Taizando, to the Great Mountain Hall, to be with Sagan, and that prayerful performance, marking the Zendo floor by a brave and a vulnerable human being who is actually exemplifying, I think, the very essence of what we're talking about here. And then just this one other thing. Please come to Upaya. We just so appreciate having visitors now. We know we can only receive 25 or 30 people at a time, but it's very uplifting for us to be able to open our temple doors even a little bit as we make our way out of this period of really being in the silo of conscientiousness and care, not wanting people to be put in harm's way by traveling here. But it seems a bit safer today, although I just recovered from COVID, so what am I talking about? It was awful. Yeah. And also those of you who are getting on airplanes, I encourage you to mask. Please take really good care of yourself. And also know that your donations to Upaya make an enormous difference. As I said, for 3 years, we only operated on gifts from others. And it is huge for us. And we really appreciate it. Also, all the faculty who have taught here over the 3 years were very generously gifted, remunerated for their time. No contracts, no agreements, but Upaya really took care of its teachers. So we encourage you to take care of our teachers in this place. So the vows are this. Say what? Oh, yeah. And the Bodhisattva interpreters, oh, I don't know how you did it, but wow. Wow. Marathonic. Bodhisattvas, thank you so much. Really. And Mind and Life Europe, Amy Gabor, that beautiful counterpart to Upaya in Europe. We're so grateful. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. In the night chant, let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly, and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, awaken. Do not squander your life. Thank you. Thank you, friends. Let us restore the Zendo.